who could an uberman be? In the philosophy of Nietzsche, one of his characteristic ideas is the concept of an uberman. A very interesting concept to me. Of course, Nietzsche had his own ideas of who that uberman is and what an uberman could accomplish. Nevertheless, he never actually showed a real down-to-earth example of who could that uberman be. And I thought many times how to conceive an uberman in my own way, such that the uberman would accomplish the theoretical goals of Nietzsche. It is worth noting that the idea of an uberman is not only characteristic or thought of by Nietzsche. Actually, there is one more philosopher who had the idea of an uberman in his philosophy, and he even gave a real life example of that uberman, unlike Nietzsche did. So that philosopher was Hegel, and according to Hegel, of course, in Hegel's philosophy, there is not a term an uberman used. So he did not speak explicitly about the concept of an uberman. However, he had such a concept within his philosophy. So, and he even exemplified that concept by pointing to Napoleon Bonaparte, the French ruler of the past, of course. So in Hegel's philosophy, an uberman is actually a Napoleon, a ruler who manages to influence reality, influence nations, and who makes supreme changes within the reality in accordance with his ideas. And Napoleon's ideas were not that bad. Even in history, he created so-called the civil code, Napoleon's civil code, and that civil code still remains a cornerstone of French law. Therefore, we've got an exemplification of an uberman. So everybody now can say that an uberman is actually a person like a great ruler. For instance, all the great rulers from the Roman Empire or Alexander the Great exactly fit in that description. There is one discrepancy between Hegel's philosophy, Hegel's philosophy of uberman, and Nietzsche's idea of an uberman. And that discrepancy is that I believe that in Nietzsche's philosophy, an uberman exists more or less on a mass scale. So this is not a supreme leader who conquers and shapes reality, even if he's got good ideas, of course. So an uberman should exist more or less on a mass scale. So that is a requirement of Nietzsche's philosophy. It is easy to conceive an uberman in accordance with comic ideas of superheroes, just the way they are present in movies, in action movies like Spider-Man, Batman, etc. These could be so-called uber people. Nevertheless, they do not meet the requirement of existing fairly well in the reality, in everyday reality. It might be difficult to create a Superman, a superhero. So, who could be an uberman existing on a mass scale? That is the question I asked myself. And how to conceive such an uberman in accordance with the requirements that I discussed before. Once upon a time, I watched a nature movie showing lives of kangaroos in Australia. Those kangaroos formed communities, families, closely knit groups, and these kangaroos were called grey kangaroos. What is interesting, they lived on desert. On that desert there were small places with trees, with vegetation, where they simply hang around. Nevertheless, they simply lived in such communities together. And there was one interesting feature I noticed, and that was also a characteristic point for the nature program that I watched, and that is they had a company of a ginger kangaroo, maybe one, maybe more than one, and those ginger kangaroos coexisted with those grey kangaroos, which was an interesting thing. Another interesting thing was that those red kangaroos did not really form such a closely tied, close group with those grey kangaroos. They existed more or less like satellite kangaroos. So they hang around with grey kangaroos, but they were not as close as grey kangaroos were to each other, in a way. Another interesting thing was that those red kangaroos had an interesting feature, that is, they would easily get annoyed by the lack of abundant food. Even if there was quite a lot of food, but not that abundant as the red kangaroo would like it to be, the red kangaroo would take off on their own into the desert in search of a new place with new abundant vegetation. And such a venture, such a endeavor was marked by risk, because on the desert there is not much food until a new plentiful place of food is found. And there are also many other dangers involved on the way. However, that red kangaroo would take that risk. And in that show, in that nature show, the red kangaroo was eventually successful after a few attempts of going back and forth, or losing location, losing the sense where the kangaroo was. So the kangaroos went lost on the desert and found the right trail to come back, etc. Eventually, the red kangaroo found the abundant place of food, new one. And what is interesting and striking is that it didn't stay in that place and didn't enjoy all the benefits of abundant food on its own. So it did not behave in a selfish way. But what it did was that it went back, it made the effort to come back to the community of grey kangaroos, and in his way in his kangaroo way, encouraged the grey kangaroos to follow him to new place. So grey kangaroos wouldn't leave the place they were at. It was the red kangaroo who did that. So in a sense, I thought that the red kangaroo is actually an uber kangaroo, a supreme kangaroo who does supreme things in comparison to grey kangaroos, and also has great, let's say, ethics, that it actually wants the company of grey kangaroos and doesn't want all the food on its own. So the red kangaroo actually shapes the reality the way Hegel's idea of uberman and Nietzsche's idea of uberman are. So that's a great fit. Now I thought, how could this example be translated into human behavior? And I thought, why not? How about translating it in a literal way? So could ginger people actually possess some uber characteristics? And I found on the Wikipedia that they possess, for instance, such a quality like they can withstand slightly more pain than an average person, according to some research that was quoted on the Wikipedia. So they already kind of possess the same, not the same, but similar characteristic of enduring hardships, let's say maybe being risk-taking, just like the red kangaroo from my story, from the nature program. Now, from my observation, there are, and my perspective, ginger people can be found occupying positions of leadership. Now, a good example of that is, of course, Donald Trump, who is often speculated to be a ginger person. And let's assume that he is. So that would be an excellent example of a ginger leader, regardless of whether I agree with Donald Trump or not. But the fact that he occupies a leadership position is important here. Another good example is that in Poland, an ambassador of Poland under the rule of the presidency of Donald Trump was also a ginger person, a ginger lady. And she was liked by Polish people. She did her job very well as well. So she fit the position of a, let's say, minor leadership, but still leadership, very well. Also in Polish TV, there were quite a few ginger TV presenters. Like, for instance, also there were a few ginger ladies. So it can be concluded that ginger people are good at communication, leadership, are seen in the media. So they actually have some supreme characteristics that could be a good starting point for conceiving, making up the idea of a down-to-earth uberman. So let's start with a ginger person then. Now, what else to add to it? Well, intelligence. So let's think which nation actually is a leader in scientific intelligence, in Nobel Prize winning. And that nation, interestingly enough, are the Jewish people. Jewish people scored the biggest number, the largest number of Nobel Prizes as such. Therefore, we've got a ginger person with Jewish intelligence. Nature, unlike the creators of the Third Reich idea of an uberman, their idea within the Third Reich was that an uberman should be a blonde person with impeccable genes. Nevertheless, their example was within one nature only. So they were purist when it comes to gene selection. Nevertheless, such an idea is actually completely at odds with what nature favors. Nature favors genetic diversity. Therefore, combining a ginger person with Jewish intelligence or simply Jewish nationality, hoping that such a ginger person would have supreme genes, is actually in keeping with reality, with what nature favors. Nevertheless, I think this is not enough, because such an uberman should also possess characteristics of supreme strength or supreme endurance. And it is easy to find such people in Africa. Those genes are supreme in a sense of genetic variety. It is said that the biggest genetic variety is found in Africa, where all the people probably come from. And it is known from history that African people were also, unfortunately, used and abused as labor, physical workers. Therefore, it proves somehow, unfortunately, in a bad way from the history, but it proves the point that there are supreme physical genes found exactly in Africa. So what we've got is a ginger person who's got Jewish intelligence, and let's mix that person then in Africa with African genes. To make it even more diverse, because nature loves diversity, we should add some Asian genes to that. Now the diverse genetic pool is complete, I believe. However, there should be more to an uberman, even if we've got already such an uberman in reality, made of all these genes, and hoping that the uberman has all the desired qualities that I described that should go with those genes. An uberman also should have some kind of supreme motivation. And one of the most effective ways of motivating people created by humans is actually religion. So let's think, what kind of religion should be somehow innate with the concept of an uberman? What kind of religion has actually accomplished supreme things? An interesting observation can be made when looking at the history of the USA. I mean the colonization of the USA. There was one group known to blaze a trail from the east to the west, which was incredibly difficult to do. No one could do that except them. and they also withstood many trials, many hardships, many difficulties. And that group were Mormons. So now, to the concept of the uberman, as thought of by me, we should add Mormonic religion, perhaps. So now we have a ginger person with Jewish intelligence, with African and Asian genes, and Mormonic drive. So we've got an uberman who is down to earth. Nevertheless, such an uberman should do some uber thing or achieve an uber goal. And the best way to assign such a goal to that uberman is to send him to a person who already attempts to make an extraordinary thing happen, and that person is Elon Musk. So the uberman, as thought of by me, should go and colonize what? Mars, of course. That's an uberman, an uber goal, and I think everything is down to earth, in keeping with reality. Would you add anything else to that concept, to that design? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and comment, of course. Thanks for watching. Cheers! I've been talking from a park which is not that great lit, and it's already cold, so I took the liberty to call myself an uberman by recording videos in such conditions. Bye.